Ladies and gentlemen, we're very pleased today to have Captain Zeke Cormier as our guest on Aviation Theater. I want to mention that captain in the Navy is equal to full colonel in the Army. And he was, is it air boss, chief, lead pilot? What is the title for the number one?
All of those things.
All of those things. He was the number one team leader for the Blue Angels. Welcome to Aviation Theater.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I'd like to start our history lesson right off the bat and go back to the beginning of what is now the Blue Angels. In 1946, the Navy started something called an aerial exhibition team, or
Exactly.
what did they call it?
They even called themselves the Blue Lancers at one time, which went over like a lead balloon, I might add.
But they didn't have an official name. It was just an exhibition team.
Precisely.
And this was in 1946.
In June of 1946.
And a segue here, and you have a book just now in print called Bearcats to Tomcats.
Wildcats to Tomcats.
Wildcats, excuse me. Wildcats to Tomcats. So I'm assuming that they originally flew Wildcats.
Well, the book is not just about the Blue Angels. It's about my time in the Navy, which started the book. It's 50 years of naval aviation. Starts with the Wildcats, which I flew, and goes all the way through to the Tomcats, which is the airplane that Phil Wood, one of the other co-authors, flew in his time in the Navy. And Wally Schirra is in the middle there, and he flew all the airplanes in between.
We interviewed Wally Schirra here a couple of years ago when he came to the Aerospace Museum. Well, let's start with Zeke Cormier. You entered the Navy in World War II?
Just before World War II started. Came in as a NAVCAD and went through flight training in Pensacola. Finished my training in Florida at Opelika, and joined the fleet in the winter of 1942 in San Diego.
In the winter of 42, those were the dark days of World War II.
That's true. And it's kind of interesting, you're going to be talking about the museum. I went through an organization called Advanced Carrier Training Group, which was at North Island, the Naval Air Station North Island, and we went into the F4F, at that time it was the F4F-3 Alpha, one of the early models of the Wildcat. And strangely enough, that airplane came from the fleet to that training unit and then went to the Great Lakes as an aircraft for their carrier training out of Chicago. And somebody ran out of gas or had a problem and landed it in the water. And just 2 years ago, they resurrected that airplane from the bottom of Lake Michigan.
Is that right?
Turns out that airplane I flew. It's in restoration at the present time in San Diego at the Aerospace Museum in San Diego.
You completed your service in World War II.
Yes.
And did you go into the Blue Angels then, or what did you do after the war?
No, I decided to stay in the Navy, and so progression of assignments, one of which was in squadrons out of Miramar, and along came the assignment to go to the Blues in 1953 after the Korean War.
Yes, now let me mention about that. Let's start at the beginning there of the Blues. In 1946, when the Navy decided to start this aerial exhibition team, they chose, was it?
Butch Voris.
Butch Voris, Commander, Lieutenant Commander
Roy
Butch
Voris.
as the first leader, and they only had 3 airplanes.
That's right. They did one show with 3 airplanes, the F-6Fs, the Wildcat, not the Wildcat, the Hellcat. And they were all instructors at Jacksonville in the Advanced Carrier Training Group on the East Coast.
They also had to all be bachelors.
They all had to be bachelors at that time. And that worked for a while, and then the guy said, hey, we got to take them as they come. And,
well, these bachelors, then, they didn't have a name, but they had a contest. I remember seeing a photograph of the advertisement. They offered a huge financial reward for anyone who would pick the name for this naval aerial exhibition team. It was $10 in cash.
I think so, yeah. And they gave them a 72-hour pass if it happened to be one of the guys.
And they received hundreds of suggestions and didn't like any of them.
That's right.
So tell our viewers how they did pick the name, the Blue Angels.
Well, they ran these names by the committee there in Jacksonville, And the admiral, who was really the brains of the whole outfit, he said, we have to show the public just what we taught these people during World War II. So we selected these people as instructor pilots, said, you go down to Miami and do the show with the F-6Fs and demonstrate some of the techniques that these people employed during World War II that were so successful.
Down on the ground where the people could see them.
Down close to the ground.
Yeah. One of the concepts was that what you do at 12, 15,000 feet.
That's right.
And they wanted to bring what you do down to the ground so people could see it.
Precisely. And Butch Forrest selected some people from the training command there. And the way the name came about was there was really a famous cabaret in New York City. We would call it a saloon in those days, but it was called the Blue Angel. And so one of the gents who was kind of sitting around sipping his afternoon tea said, maybe we ought to call it the Blue Angels. Well, it was an immediate hit. And the admiral liked it even. Didn't tell him where he got the name, but he thought that was great, the Blue Angels. And from that point on, that's what they were called, the Blue Angels. And then it progressed. They went from the F-6Fs in the summer of '46, and then because the F-8F, the Bearcat, which is a marvelous aircraft, had come on the scene and in the fleet at that time, said we have to be more modern than the F-6Fs because this is the new generation of airplane. So why don't we do the F-8Fs, the Bearcats? So they picked up everything, went to Bethpage, where Grumman Aircraft was at that time, and picked up 4 Bearcats. And that's how the 4th airplane got in the picture. And went back to Jacksonville and said, now we're going to be 4, and we won't do the 3V again. We'll do a 4. We'll call it the Diamond. And that's how that evolved.
Now you have 2 different positions. You can either be a member of the Diamond, or you can be a solo. Would you tell our viewers about the Diamond and the solo?
Well, they did a couple of shows and very successful with the Diamond formation. And it took a little time to make the pass, do the performance at the routine that they were doing, turn around and come back over the field. So Butch Forrest said, we got to fill that time up with something, because people are standing around looking at other things, and while we're getting turned around, we got to have an airplane go by and just do anything, upside down, do a vertical climb, do something to fill up that time space. So they added a 5th person. And then at the end of the show in those days, they had an airplane, an SNJ, which they called Beetle Bomb. And they demonstrated the kinds of fighter passes that you'd make at an enemy airplane. And they had a little smoke generator in the back of this SNJ, and the announcer would say, well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a low pass that they're going to make on the enemy, and this is to demonstrate the kind of thing that they did as a fighter pilot out and against the enemy. And they said, oh, look at this, and the guy would start the smoke bomb and throw a dummy out of the back of the airplane. And he ducked behind the trees or something, and everybody said, my Lord, they shot this guy down. And that was part of the show. So they filled that part of it up.
And they kept the audience's attention.
Oh, absolutely. They were waiting for the guy to jump out of the airplane, and the thing was on fire, and he disappeared behind the trees or a building or something, and then come in and land when no one was watching. But it was sensational. And from that point on, why the show got a little more intricate, it got to be a little lengthier. They added the 6th airplane, and the solos would then do opposing passes rather than just do it singly. They do opposing passes together, that sort of thing. And now that's how that evolved, and they're still using that format.
And on the solo passes, they come at each other horizontally.
Yes.
Then they both turn.
Yes.
And what are they, 36 inches apart?
Oh, well, not quite that. Maybe 38 inches. No.
Well, I've heard that you can feel the air from the other plane's canopy, that they bump each other.
That's true.
The air in between, it's like the Bernoulli effect.
Exactly.
And they bump each other, they're so close.
You get a proximity effect between the airplanes. But you got to recognize that they're coming down a runway, which is the front of the crowd, okay? And it's like driving your car on the street. He picks the right-hand side, and the guy coming the other way picks his side, and the runways sometimes are 200 feet apart. I mean, wide, right? So if you're driving down this side, the separation, watching it, looks like it's a lot closer than it really is. But you do get that the proximity effect between the 2 airplanes. Now, and you also do the same thing when you're in the formation.
Yes, because they are 36 inches apart then
Precisely.
in the formation.
Yeah, exactly.
And they can actually feel the bump from wingtip to canopy. After, 3 years, 4 years, the Korean War came along.
Korean War came
And
along.
they were disbanded.
Yes, the CNO felt that it was a little out of taste to have these people out in a shooting war and have the Blue Angels traipsing around the country doing air shows.
When they were needed in
Precisely.
combat.
So they took the team in totally, and took all the people in it and put them in VF-191, which is a squadron in Air Group 19. And they went aboard Valley Forge and as a group and filled out the squadron. And the skipper of the team, who was Johnny Magda at the time, became the skipper of the squadron. So it was, they had talent.
Was he the second skipper of the team then, after Voris?
No, there were several in between.
There were?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, because you're limited on your tour of duty.
That's right.
Let's mention that. What is it, a 1 or 2 year tour of duty?
It's a two-year tour.
2 year tour.
And the people are brought in incrementally so that you don't have a total
They're
change.
staggered.
Yeah.
Like the Senate and
Exactly.
Congress.
You bring 2 people in, and they replace with replacing 2 that are leaving, and then you do the other 2, and so you stagger those numbers, so that.
Okay. Well, let's mention 2 other things. Number 1, they get to pick their own replacements.
In those days, you did. No more. I mean, I was going to say no mas, but it's no more.
Not politically
Not
correct.
politically correct.
But
So-
in those days, they got to pick their own replacement.
And why not? When you come right down to it, these people are picked from the fleet, and I don't care who you are in the fleet, you know who the drivers are. I mean, you just create a reputation for yourself. You get on and off the boat without, off the carrier without, pranging yourself. And you can normally tell the caliber of the airplane driver in that category alone. If he does that well, he knows how to fly the airplane. And especially if you do it at night, which a lot of us don't.
Well, so
like to
the
talk
Blues
about.
are the best of the best. They're chosen for a 2-year tour, but they don't get any extra pay.
No, sir.
There's no extra pay for
No,
this.
none whatsoever. And it's a pretty rigorous kind of existence too. They normally do on a formal basis and before the public about 80 shows a year.
80 shows for the public
For
a
the
year.
public.
But they do around 300 because they're performing every day.
Well, in the practice sessions
Yeah.
at El Centro, when we went to El Centro, why, it wasn't uncommon to fly 3 hops a day. And you do that.
Which would be 3 shows a day.
Which would be 3 shows. Well, you have to kind of pick and choose on the stuff that's the toughest. And keep doing that over and over again until you feel, well, we got that, let's go on to something new. And you normally start out in the training program by taking 2 people and go through the routine. You're normally your number 2 guy, and you go through the routine, bring it down to altitude that you're going to do for the show, and then add the 3rd, and then finally the 4th, and go through the routine with 4 people. Then you add the 2 other guys who are the solos, and you practice that ad nauseum. You just, you finally say, hey, come on, let's go to the club and have a glass of tea.
Now, your official home base is Pensacola, Florida.
Yes,
But your winter home is El Centro.
El Centro, California.
And for the people here in Southern California, could they go to El Centro and watch the Blues
Sure.
practice out there? Is that open to the public?
They have a show, it's kind of a rehearsal at the end of their training session that's open to the public, and it's a dress rehearsal, and the public is invited, and then they do their first official show at El Centro, and that happens about 1 February.
So it's the weather's nice. It's cool over
every
there.
day.
That's
Well,
right,
every
yeah.
day you've got a day like this to fly in. That's why it's El Centro.
After the Korean War, the Blue Angels were reactivated again.
Yes.
And surprise, who did they pick to be the lead pilot?
Butch Voris.
Again. But he was married,
Well, most of the guys at that time were married.
so they let married men fly after
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, Butch is really a solid citizen. He's a magnificent airplane driver, as a pilot. And he did all those things on the ground, too, which is part of the PR aspect of the team that's very rarely mentioned. You appear before you do a thing like this. And
To promote aviation.
precisely,
The
they
purpose-
are a recruiting tool.
The purpose of Aviation Theater is to promote pilots, aircraft, and aviation.
Precisely. And all of that time that you spend on the ground at a show site, for instance, is involved in the PR aspect of naval aviation. And they're a recruiting tool. As a matter of fact, the funds from and operating the team comes from the recruiting budget. So, and you go to hospitals and talk to the folks in particularly the veterans hospitals and that sort of thing. So you're kind of getting back among your own.
Now, the #1 lead pilot, which I need to mention, you were the #1 lead
Yes,
pilot.
yes.
The Blue Angel pilots themselves, they call #1 boss.
Yes.
To them, you are boss.
Yes.
To the public, is it lead pilot or chief pilot?
This leader of the Blue Angels.
Leader of the Blue Angels.
Now, and it wasn't true when I was in the team, he is a commanding officer. The Blue Angel flight demonstration team is a command.
It became a squadron. That's
Exactly.
right. It
That's right.
became a squadron.
And the leader, not only is the leader, he's the squadron skipper. So it's different. Then, at that time when I was in the team, it's remained that way for the next 10 years. You were an officer in charge. That was your title.
But now you're the commanding officer of a
The
squadron.
commanding officer of a squadron.
Now, you said they fly almost every day. When do you have some time off if you're in the Blue Angels?
Well, let me give you a typical schedule. Supposing you're going to do the show at Miramar, and you leave Pensacola probably on Wednesday. You arrive at Miramar late on Wednesday or early Thursday. You stand down, get the briefing from the guy in charge of the air show. You fly a practice show and just kind of warm up a little bit. Thursday, that's the Thursday schedule. Friday, you do a kind of a dress rehearsal for invited guests,
That's
special
news
people.
media day, invited
Precisely.
guests,
Exactly.
and news media day.
Saturday's a show day, Sunday's a show day, and at the end of the show on Sunday, while you go meet people and do that kind of stuff, Monday morning you jump in your airplanes and go back to Pensacola. So the rest of Monday is a day off.
You get all of Monday off.
All of Monday off.
The whole day.
Whether you want to or not. And then Tuesday, you go in and do the paperwork. Believe it or not, there's tons of paperwork. More now than when I was there.
Okay, let me mention something.
I just threw that stuff in the... No, I didn't.
Let me mention some secret code words that our viewers would like to know about. When a Blue Angel says, I had a safety during the last performance, what does a safety mean?
Well, it's just a nice way to say, well, I kind of made a boo-boo, and I know how to solve it.
But you recognized it yourself,
Yes, absolutely.
whether anybody else did or not.
Fortunately, it's of that nature. You don't want other people to notice, but you know it. And you say to the skipper and say, hey, I ran out of speed at the such and such, or I got a little out of position and I made a safety. But have no fear, I know how to solve that. So
When they say, I'll take care of it,
I'll take care of it.
that's another secret code phrase.
Well-
When you say, I'll take care of it, it means I will correct whatever it was.
Precisely. You know. And it's kind of a nice language that you use. You know. He doesn't yell at you and say, you dummy, you got out of... He said, I'll take care of it, sir. Sir.
Another thing is that all of the members of the Blue Angels have a saying, and it is, I'm just glad to be here. Would you tell our viewers what it means when they say, I'm just glad to be here?
Well, you got to recognize that all these people come from the fleet.
They're all carrier pilots.
All carrier pilots.
Most
And-
instructors. Most of them are instructors.
Well, not necessarily. They come from squadrons. They come from units like Top Gun, other units of that nature. And what it really means is, I'm just lucky to be here because there are some other folks out there in the fleet who have the same kind of capabilities and the same kind of talents. And I just happen to be at the right place at the right time to be here where I am.
Or I had a good day.
Or I had a good day, exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about the ground crew.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I've read that they can change an engine in 90 minutes.
Well, that's stretching it a little too far. Maybe, I don't know. But there isn't enough credit given to those guys who do that. They ride around this airplane. It takes twice as long to get to wherever they have to go. And when they land, they have to get the airplanes and get them ready for whatever the next activity may be. And it's not uncommon for them to have a down airplane, take the engine out, put a new engine in, go through the test process, and get it ready to go at the next hop. I mean, they're geniuses.
I've seen pictures of people working on the Blue Angels airplane in a tuxedo, in a swimming suit.
Yeah.
Because if they're off duty,
yeah,
and they're needed,
yeah,
they come.
They're there. That's right.
And
well, it's just
they
a
have no
marvelous
holidays, no birthdays, no wedding anniversaries.
Yeah.
They're on call all the time.
Yeah. It's just a remarkable group of people. And talent, I'll tell you, the talent that those people have is just, it's mind-boggling to think that they have that kind of dedication to do what they do and do it so well.
The concept that impressed me was that there are no individuals in the Blue Angels. It's a team.
And it's a team. Yeah, it truly is a team. And all of the officers in the team have that same concept. It's all one team. And the troops who are out there, when they come in, when they leave, and then jump in that old airplane and fly off to wherever. It's an ideal situation. Mm-hmm. And the commanding officer has got to look at himself and say, I'm just happy to be here, to experience this thing.
What a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah.
Just a couple of more questions,
sure,
and I'll let you get back to your book signing. He's here today to sign his book, and let's mention about that book right now. The title of the book is?
The title of the book, well, first of all, it was written by 3 tailhook pilots, among whom is Wally Schirra, myself, Wally Schirra, and Phil Wood, who was a longtime carrier pilot and skipper of the Kitty Hawk at one time, as the commanding officer of Kitty Hawk, and Barrett Tillman, who has written several books more of a historical nature than, but we needed him to see that we didn't make some mistakes about names of airplanes and places and that sort of thing. And we call it Wildcats to Tomcats, and it's 50 years of naval aviation. We wanted to call it Tales of 3 Hookers. but
Representative Schroeder wouldn't let you do that.
Listen, the political correctness team just had a stroke. So we call it Tales from the Flight Deck.
And this book is available in the gift shop at the Aerospace Museum.
Correct.
Okay, now let me ask you about the physical aspects of being a Blue Angel pilot. Today's pilots, in the ships that they fly today, they pull 8 Gs without suits, without pressurized suits. Would you tell us about your experiences in flying? You may not have pulled 8 Gs, but
no,
you didn't wear pressurized suits.
No, we didn't.
And your eyeballs actually come out of your head. It distorts your face. Tell us about the physical aspects of flying.
Well, some of that's exaggerated a little bit. We started flying without G suits, and because we had some special flight suits that we just looked neater. When we crawl out of the airplane, as sweaty as we were, it just looked neater than having a pressure suit. And we tried to tailor the show so we didn't have to worry about pulling those Gs. And 8 Gs may be true in some instances, but it's an instantaneous kind of thing. It's not a steady pulse where you're losing some kind of consciousness.
At one point, yeah, at one point you're pulling 8 Gs. So when you're moving your arms and your feet, you're actually fighting 4 Earth gravities, 4 times the normal gravity of Earth.
Precisely.
And then you're still performing these precise maneuvers in close proximity to each other.
Exactly.
Which is what makes it really tremendous. Really just unbelievable what they do.
That's true.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell our viewers about the Blue Angels?
No, except that traditionally the Blues have just done a magnificent job. And they're
Amen to that.
And they're still involved in the recruiting business. And it's not uncommon for someone to show up and say, hey, just because I'm here in uniform is because you guys inspired me to do that. And that the reward comes in that. So thanks to you guys, I'm now a naval aviator. And it's kind of heartwarming to think maybe we made a career-type person.
I met Kirby Grant one time, and he used to play Sky King on television.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And he said that people are constantly coming up to him and telling him that they became a pilot because of watching him on television
Absolutely.
as Sky King.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for
Hey, it's
being
my
with us
pleasure.
today.
My pleasure.
This is
All right.
Captain Fred. We've been pleased to interview Captain Zeke Cormier, lead pilot for the Blue Angels. As always, happy landings!